I hadn't seen Liam's mom in years. Not since I was that awkward kid tagging along after school, trying desperately to fit in. But now, stepping into their house again, I realized something had shifted. Maybe in me, maybe in her, maybe just in the way time reshapes everything. Claire was in the kitchen when I walked in. She stood barefoot on the worn wooden floor, the soft cream sweater she wore slightly loose around her wrists. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands escaping to frame her face in a way that felt effortless but intentional. I remember the quiet way she moved, how she poured tea with calm precision, like she'd done 1,000 times before, but today it felt different, somehow more personal. Her voice was low and steady as she greeted me, a tone I hadn't noticed as a kid. There was a quiet tiredness in it, the kind that only comes from carrying too much for too long. And yet, when she smiled, it wasn't the warm smile of a mother greeting a child. It was something softer, more thoughtful, like she was seeing me in a way she never had before. I caught myself studying her, and for a moment, I felt the familiar flutter of something new and unspoken. It wasn't admiration or infatuation yet. It was curiosity, wrapped in a strange tenderness I hadn't expected. The kind of feeling that whispers to you quietly when you least want it to. We sat in the living room after dinner, the soft hum of the city outside just audible through the cracked window. Claire leaned back in the armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I was on the sofa, watching her out of the corner of my eye, noticing the way her eyes held a distant sadness beneath their usual warmth. There was a pause between us, not uncomfortable but charged. It was like the space where something could happen, but hadn't yet. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a quiet, "You look different." She laughed softly, a little surprised, and said, "I suppose time does that to everyone." And she was right. Time had changed her, subtly, gracefully. It wasn't about age or looks. It was the way her presence filled the room now, more solid and real, less like a background to my childhood memories, and more like something I wanted to understand. I don't think either of us knew then what the quiet moment meant. But later, lying in bed that night, I realized it was the first time I truly noticed her. Not as my friend's mom, but as a woman I wanted to know. And maybe that was the moment everything started to change. Over the next few weeks, I found myself spending more time at Liam's house. He was often out late. Work, friends, who knows? That left Claire and me alone more than before. And slowly, our interactions began to shift, though neither of us said it aloud. One evening, after dinner, we settled into the living room, the soft glow of the table lamp casting gentle shadows on the walls. The room smelled faintly of vanilla and something else, her perfume, delicate but lingering, like a quiet invitation. We were watching an old movie, something slow and melancholic, the kind that made you think about the past and what's left unsaid. I remember how her eyes caught the flickering light from the screen, distant yet somehow focused on me. At one point, she reached over to grab the remote, and her hand brushed against my arm. It was such a small thing, a casual gesture, but the way her fingers lingered just a little longer than necessary sent an unexpected warmth through me. Her touch was soft, almost tentative, like she was testing the water without wanting to admit she was already wading in deep. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the sensation settle. Her skin was cool but comforting beneath my wrist. And for a moment, the room felt smaller, as if the world outside had quieted and left just the two of us suspended in time. She looked at me sideways, her gaze gentle but searching. "You're quieter than before," she said softly, breaking the silence. I smiled, not because I had a clever reply, but because I wanted to be honest. "Maybe I just see more now," I said, my voice low. It was true. Seeing her this way, not as my friend's mom, but as someone quietly beautiful and achingly human, made everything feel different. There was a pause after that, filled with the hum of the old movie soundtrack and the occasional creak of the house settling around us. In that silence, we shared something without words, a connection deeper than friendship, yet too fragile to name. It was like standing on the edge of something unknown, neither of us quite ready to take the leap. Later, when the credits rolled and the lights came back on, Claire didn't move away. She sat still, her hand slowly withdrawing from my arm, but her eyes stayed on mine a moment longer, as if trying to memorize the way I looked right then, open, patient, quietly hopeful. That night, as I left Liam's house and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and uncertainty. I wasn't sure what this was yet. I wasn't even sure if she felt it too. But I knew it was something new, something I couldn't ignore. And just like that, the quiet moments between us grew heavier with unspoken possibilities, soft silences that said more than any words ever could. Part 3. The night I stayed late, it was one of those gray, rainy evenings where the world outside feels distant and blurry, the kind of rain that traps you somewhere between moments. Liam had left for a trip earlier that day, and I decided to stop by Claire's house, almost without thinking. Maybe I wanted to check on her, or maybe I just didn't want to be alone with my own thoughts. She opened the door, surprised to see me, but there was no hesitation in her invitation. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside as the rain tapped gently on the porch behind me. Inside, the house smelled faintly of damp wood and cinnamon, a comforting warmth that wrapped around me like a worn blanket. She poured 2 glasses of red wine, the deep clink of glass against glass breaking the quiet. The room was dim, illuminated only by the soft light of a single lamp and the occasional flicker of lightning outside. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the wine glasses between us acting as both barrier and bridge. I noticed her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her fingers around the glass. Her eyes were distant, clouded with a sadness she didn't try to hide. After a long silence, she spoke, voice low and almost fragile. "Sometimes I feel invisible. Like I'm here, but no one really sees me anymore." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. I reached across the table, not touching, just letting her know I was there. "You're far from invisible," I said gently. "If anything, you're the most present person I know." She looked up, meeting my gaze with something raw and unguarded. For a moment, the years between us felt less important. She sighed, shaking her head. "You don't understand. You're too young to understand the kind of loneliness." I leaned forward, my voice steady, my heart pounding. "And I'm too ready not to." The room seemed to hold its breath. The unspoken weight between us thickened, charged with everything we hadn't said. She looked away, cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and something softer, maybe longing, maybe regret. The silence that followed was colder than the rain outside. I stood, not wanting to push, not wanting to break the fragile line she was holding between us. "I should go," I whispered. Claire nodded slowly, but her eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, as if she were trying to memorize my face before I left. That night, as I walked home beneath the steady drizzle, I felt the bittersweet ache of something just out of reach. She had called me too young, too inexperienced. But I knew, in that moment, that what I felt wasn't youth or recklessness. It was something real, something worth waiting for, if she was willing to take that chance. After that night, everything changed. Or maybe it stayed the same on the surface, but underneath, the air between Claire and me thickened with something neither of us wanted to name. For weeks, we avoided each other. I stopped dropping by Liam's house, and when I did, I kept my visits short and carefully neutral. Claire's usual warm smile was replaced by a polite nod, eyes flicking away before they could meet mine. The easy closeness we'd built unraveled into a cold distance, like a thread pulled too tight, snapping silently in the dark. It felt strange and wrong, but the weight of what hung between us was too heavy to bear. I told myself I was protecting her. Maybe myself too. Liam noticed. He asked once if I was all right, but I shrugged it off. How could I explain? How could I tell him that his mother's glance haunted me, that her presence pulled me towards something I wasn't supposed to want? One afternoon, a few weeks later, I was at the grocery store when I saw her. Claire, standing by the produce aisle, looking like she was trying to remember what she'd come for. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, and she wore a soft scarf loosely draped over her shoulders. She didn't see me. I watched her from across the aisle, The quiet way she reached out to touch a ripe pear, fingers brushing the skin like it was fragile. The slight pause, as if she was somewhere far away in her own thoughts. In that moment, I realized how much I missed her presence. Not just the easy conversations or the late-night silences, but the small, unspoken moments that made her real to me. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my room, my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen, my heart caught somewhere between surprise and something deeper, a quiet relief maybe, or the tentative first thread of hope. I typed back without hesitation, "Not really. You." Her reply came quickly, almost instantly. "Same." That simple exchange broke the walls we'd built around ourselves. It was soft, almost fragile, but it was a start. Still, the ache remained, a reminder of what we couldn't say or wouldn't say. I thought about the way her voice had sounded that night, the vulnerability hidden beneath her usual composure, the way her hand had brushed mine, the warmth that lingered long after she'd pulled away. And I knew that avoiding each other wasn't the answer. But fear of judgment, of misunderstanding, of what the world would say, held us apart like an invisible barrier. The nights felt colder, lonelier. The silence between us stretched wider, filled with things unsaid and emotions we were too afraid to face. Yet beneath it all, beneath the distance and the hesitation, the quiet tension simmered, waiting for a moment when it could no longer be ignored. The night of Liam's birthday dinner felt like stepping into a carefully balanced world where everything was just as it should be, except for the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Claire arrived, looking impeccable as always. Her confidence was undeniable, but there was a softness around her eyes, a kind of careful reserve that told me she was holding something back. She greeted me politely, but her gaze flickered away quickly when it met mine, like she was trying not to give anything away. The evening passed with laughter and light chatter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the distance between us had grown wider, even in the same room. After the last guest left and the house grew quiet, I found myself in the kitchen. Claire was there, rinsing dishes, the water running softly in the sink. The room was dim, shadows playing against the walls, and the familiar scent of her perfume wrapped around me like a bittersweet memory. I hesitated at the doorway, the sound of the water filling the silence. Then I said her name softly, "Claire." She startled, eyes wide and vulnerable for a split second before she quickly masked it with a practiced calm. I took a slow step forward, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat in the quiet room. "I miss our late-night talks," I said, the words coming out more honest than I intended. She didn't respond at first, just continued to rinse the plates, her hands steady but her breathing shallow. Finally, she whispered, "It was a mistake, letting it get that close." Her words hit me like a cold wave. But instead of anger or disappointment, I felt something softer, an aching tenderness. I shook my head gently. "You didn't let it." "I did too." She turned, finally meeting my gaze. There was something raw and fragile in her eyes, a mixture of fear and longing that words couldn't fully express. "You don't know what you're asking for," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I stepped closer, careful not to overwhelm her. "I know exactly who I'm asking." For a moment, the distance between us dissolved. I saw her hands, still wet from the water, trembling slightly as I reached out and took a plate from her grasp. Our fingers brushed, the briefest touch, but electric. Her breath caught, a soft sound that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. She looked away quickly, cheeks flushed with a mix of emotions, shame, desire, hesitation. "I can't," she said finally, the weight of those two words hanging heavy between us. I nodded slowly, understanding that this wasn't a battle to be won. It was a fragile, delicate moment, a doorway she wasn't ready to open yet. But as I stepped back, I hoped my eyes said what I couldn't say out loud. "I'll wait. For as long as it takes." In the quiet aftermath, the house felt colder, emptier, but beneath the stillness, something had shifted. The walls we'd built around ourselves had cracks now, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they crumbled completely. There was a moment, one I replay over and over in my mind, when everything felt like it was on the verge of breaking. Like the fragile thread holding us together was about to snap, and all the careful silence between Claire and me would unravel into something raw and unmanageable. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was at Liam's place, helping with some yard work. Claire was inside, and I could see her through the window, moving around the kitchen, her silhouette framed by the late afternoon light. She looked tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. We had been skirting around the truth for weeks, pretending that the tension between us didn't exist. But that day, something shifted. She came outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and stopped just a few feet away from me. The distance was charged, too close to ignore, too far to touch. Her eyes searched mine like she was trying to find an answer she didn't want to admit she needed. "Why are we doing this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between us, heavy and impossible to answer easily. "I don't know," I said honestly, the words tasting like defeat. "Maybe because we're scared, or maybe because we don't want to hurt the people around us." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the battle raging inside her, between what she felt and what she thought she should feel. The weight of years of expectations, of quiet sacrifices she had made, all etched into her face. I took a slow step closer, the summer heat thick in the air, and reached out to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm and soft, and for a moment, her breath hitched, a small, almost inaudible sound that echoed louder than words. But then she pulled back, shaking her head as if trying to clear a fog. "I can't do this. Not like this. It's not fair to anyone." Her vulnerability cracked the armor I thought she always wore. I wanted to tell her everything, that I was willing to wait, to be patient, to carry the weight if she needed me to. But all I could do was stand there, silent, letting the moment stretch between us. We ended up sitting on the porch steps, side by side, but not touching, watching the sky darken. The silence was heavy but honest, full of things we needed to feel but couldn't put into words. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how fragile we were, how close we had come to losing what might have been the most important thing in my life. But I also knew that love wasn't about rushing. It was about understanding when to step back and when to hold on tighter. And as much as it hurt, sometimes holding on meant letting go of the moment and waiting for the right time to come again. It took time, more time than either of us expected. But slowly, the walls we'd built around our hearts began to crumble. Not with a crash, but with gentle, persistent whispers of hope. After months of hesitation, of stolen glances and unspoken words, something changed between Claire and me. It wasn't a grand confession or a dramatic moment. It was quiet, soft, and utterly real. One evening, I found myself back at Liam's house, the air thick with the scent of jasmine from the garden just beyond the open window. Claire was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a light shawl, the fading sunlight casting a warm glow on her face. She looked at me, not like the confident woman who'd always held herself together, but like someone letting down her guard for the first time. Without thinking, I sat beside her, the wooden bench creaking under our weight. Our shoulders brushed lightly, and a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the summer air. She sighed, leaning her head against my shoulder, the faintest tremble in her breath telling me how much she'd fought to get to this moment. "I was scared," she said softly, "scared of what this could mean for you, for me, for Liam." I turned to look at her, fingers gently brushing a stray hair behind her ear, careful not to rush the fragile moment. "We'll figure it out," I said quietly. Together. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw all the hope and fear, the longing and hesitation, mingling into something beautiful and real. That night wasn't about promises or plans. It was about simply being two people who had found each other against the odds, willing to explore what came next with patience and respect. And then Liam walked onto the porch, smiling softly. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a quiet understanding that the people we care about can surprise us in the most unexpected ways. He sat down beside us, and Claire took his hand in hers, then reached out to rest hers lightly on mine. The touch was simple, gentle, and spoke of acceptance, trust, and a bond deeper than any one moment. We sat together like that for a while, the three of us sharing the stillness of a summer evening, wrapped in a quiet warmth that felt like home. In that moment, I realized that love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's about the small, steady moments, the hand on your back when you need support, the shared silence that says, "I'm here," the willingness to wait and grow together. Claire's fingers curled around mine, warm and steady, and I felt the steady beat of her heart through our touch. It was a rhythm I wanted to follow, wherever it led. And so, we began, not with fireworks or loud declarations, but with the quiet certainty that we belonged together. Not despite our differences, but because of them. Because love, at its most beautiful, is patient, gentle, and brave enough to hold space for every part of who we are.